My intention is to tell you a little bit about the UN Global Compact, and then to talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, how it's going, and a little of what they are, but I think you're probably already fairly up to speed on that. And then some thoughts on what we need to do to accelerate progress on the goals, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's good for your businesses. I'm going to kick things off with a short video that's part of a campaign that the UN Global Compact has launched at the global level called Forward Faster, and it's about accelerating progress, so I hope you enjoy this. We'll come back to some of those themes, but first, Global Compact. Launched in 2000 by then Secretary General Kofi Annan, he recognized, coming out of the 90s, where we'd seen a rapid globalization of the world economy, with companies typically in the north chasing reduced costs of production wherever they could find it, and not particularly caring about the standards of working conditions or environmental impacts that ensued. Kofi Annan recognized that something needed to be done about this, and so he called on business leaders to join a global compact with the UN of shared values. And he had a terrific insight that those shared values could be defined by UN treaties that had already been widely ratified around the world. And that's how the Global Compact came into being. They looked at UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and drew out the essence of those into a set of principles that business could ascribe to. And here we are. 40 companies answered the call back in 2000. Now we have over 21,000 companies globally, and other 3,400 non-business organizations all across the world, and local networks like the one that I manage here in the UK in 62 countries and growing. Here in the UK, we have 942 participants at the moment, and that's also growing quite rapidly. To join, the commitment is twofold. First, to operationalize, I guess that's threefold. First, to operationalize the 10 principles throughout the organization. And this is a commitment the CEO makes in a letter to the Secretary General, and that letter is on our website, so it's in the public domain. So there is a degree of gravity to this commitment, and we hope accountability. The second part, more accountability. Companies that join Global Compact are required to report annually on the progress they're making towards operationalizing the goals. And thirdly, companies are committing to support the wider UN development agenda, which for the time being is best described by the SDGs. What is sustainable development? Let's take a moment to just pause on that point. Back in 1987, the UN started thinking about the connections between social and environmental, and they commissioned a report called Our Common Future. The key outcome of that was the Brundtland Report, and the key outcome of that report was this really, I think, elegant definition of what sustainable development is. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This work set in motion a chain of events through a series of other initiatives that took us to Rio +20 in 2012, at which point the countries there agreed to give a mandate to define the future we want, and that was going to be encapsulated into the Sustainable Development Goals. And they set to work on the largest consultation that the UN has ever undertaken, speaking to literally tens of thousands of stakeholders around the world to identify what are the key elements of the future we want, to codify that into a set of goals and targets, and ta-da, the SDGs were born. And I think that, again, it's in the title of my presentation, and I think, for me anyway, that idea of the future we want is a really powerful vision, and the way that it was formed through this extraordinary consultation and equally extraordinary diplomatic achievement of getting every country in the world to sign up to this agenda. We don't see that. Well, will we ever see it again? We haven't seen it very often, and we haven't seen it since. There are 17 goals. Beneath the goals, there are 169 much more specific targets, and there are 232 indicators to measure the progress we're making. This screen is the way most people relate to the goals: end poverty, zero hunger, quality education. Even people somewhat familiar with the goals rarely get into the long grass of the targets, but I would really urge you to do so. That's where you see the real richness of this agenda and just how holistic and comprehensive it is. It covers things like reducing death and injury from automobile accidents, the largest cause of death globally for people under 20. It talks about drug addiction. It talks about preserving the genetic diversity of our agricultural seed stock. It's quite an extraordinary list, and I think a really valuable framework for business that are trying to understand their place in the world and how you can impact on sustainability. The goals are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone everywhere. At this point, I want to note that it was national governments, obviously, that signed us up to this. They made the commitment, but they did so in the full knowledge that they couldn't achieve it on their own, and that they're going to require contributions from all members of society, from business, from academia, local governments, civil society organizations. We need everyone to understand how they are impacting the goals, both positively and negatively, but it's also really critical to not stop there. We need you, once you've identified where your impacts are, to then move on from business as usual and do more of the positive stuff and less of the negative stuff, so that we make progress towards this really important objective, the future we want. As we've heard, the deadline, if we want to look at it that way, for achieving the goals is 2030, which puts us halfway there. At the General Assembly this year, there was a lot of stock taking being done. On screen are three, I think, of the most important reports on how we're doing, and there are URLs there if you're interested in reading more about them. But I can save you time. We're not doing well. In fact, we're doing pretty poorly. From 2015 to 2019, there was progress, but not nearly enough, not nearly fast enough to achieve the goals. And then with the pandemic and the war in the Ukraine and the cost of living crisis that triggered, we've been sliding backwards. So we need to get going. So I'll give you a minute to scan this slide and choose your poison, I suppose. I'm particularly struck by a woman dies every 2 minutes from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. That's a pretty shocking statistic, but I think there's something there to depress everyone. The stock take, though, from the UN Global Compact and Accenture that comes from a private sector perspective, I think offers just a little bit more hope. There's broad agreement that the prospects for 2030 are pretty grim, but equally, though, that we are on the right track, that this is an important agenda, that if we miss 2030, it doesn't mean we just stop working on this. It's still the future we want, and we still need to be working towards it. And it's encouraging to see that such a high proportion of business leadership are recognizing that. The report provides some pathways for progress, some constructive guidance for business on how to engage with the agenda, and so I would certainly encourage you to have a look at that. One of the things that's particularly strong on is it has some great ideas for how business can measure their SDG impacts and relate them into some of the other ESG reporting that you might be doing voluntarily or you might be being asked to do by your customers. The key pathways, though, I think this is really the meat of it. This is where we need you to start thinking about how you're prioritizing sustainability in your organizations and getting to what the kids were saying on the video. And many of these key pathways are featured in the Forward Faster campaign. So firstly, we need to recommit to the basics by adopting responsible human rights-based policies and strategies and conducting business in a principled manner. And again, I think we're all about the principles at Global Compact, and I think even if you don't want to adopt ours, it's the right way forward. The second one is providing a living wage. That's really a key linchpin to so many of the other SDGs, but there's a very strong business case for doing so. We're not asking anybody to be charitable. There's a strong business case for that. Next up is promoting gender equality, and same again. There really needs to be gender balance across all levels of organizations, but obviously especially in leadership. We need to innovate responsibly by infusing purpose and responsibility into our innovation activities and anticipating unintended consequences. There's some probably big question marks around AI right now and how rapidly that's developing, and clearly some questions around how much thought has gone into all of the implications of that. We need to accelerate climate action. That's probably the area where we're seeing the most progress, but too often that progress is just in measuring emissions and not enough really hard progress on reducing those emissions and making the really hard decisions on business transformation to get to net zero. We're working around the edges, but there's going to require many organizations and possibly for many of you, some quite fundamental changes in your business models to survive in a net zero world. And that's coming. So you can delay, but probably delay is going to be more costly than biting the bullet and getting on with it. We need to improve water stewardship. We need to protect and restore nature. We need to invest in circularity. The principles of a circular economy are going to be essential and, again, key to achieving the future we want. Corporate finance, again, is important, and there's huge opportunities for business in that. The rush of money into ESG has been really quite profound over the last few years, and that's not letting up. We have a number of investors in our network. They're bullish on this. They are absolutely convinced that companies that have strong ESG credentials are better run companies, and that this is going to translate into long-term profitability for them. So there's, again, a very strong business case in that. And then lastly, we need to strengthen sustainability leadership. So obviously we need leaders of companies to be driving action within their companies, but we also need that to be public, to inspire other companies to create the necessary social norms around this agenda, that this is the way. And if you're not on board with achieving this future, that should be a ticket to pariah status, not just something that we consider to be acceptable. Global Compact has lots of tools to support companies on this journey. I've mentioned Forward Faster. Another really helpful one is the SDG Ambition benchmarks. And the idea here is just to help you to internalize some of the key SDG targets that have a strong business case, but also where business can have a really strong impact in terms of achieving the goals. It covers off most of those areas that I've just been through in terms of the key pathways. Another tool we've recently developed, this is a production of the Global Compact Network UK, a playbook for smaller companies to help integrate the SDGs into their business. We're absolutely convinced that this isn't just a big company agenda. This is something for everybody to be embracing. Customers and staff and other stakeholders are very enthusiastic about this agenda. It can help in recruitment, it can help in sales. as I keep on saying, the business case is strong. Okay, my penultimate slide, and I want to return to the idea of creating the future we want. It's not going to happen organically. We can't afford to be passive and just go with the flow. That's how we get the future we deserve, not the future that we want. The future we want is where all people and the environment can thrive. We want a just transition to a net zero economy that avoids the worst impacts of climate change and adapts to the changes we can't avoid, where no one and no place is left behind. No poverty, good health, well-being, gender equality, affordable clean energy, decent work, sustainable cities, peace. The SDGs provide the vision and a practical, globally recognized framework to achieve this future. And notably, our government, and if you're not from the UK, your government, has already committed to this agenda. So we do have a vehicle here that's already recognized, and it's a door that we can easily push again. I know many of you are already doing great work in this area. I urge you to make that commitment more tangible and more visible. Use the SDGs as a tool to mobilize enthusiasm and resources. There's great power in being part of this global movement. I encourage you to harness that power to increase your own impact and achieve your own sustainability goals. Thanks very much. A shameless pitch for LinkedIn connections here if you want to fall for it.
Thank you.